Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to finally get on with talking about the work on the 1973 Suzuki TS50, my latest major project. Here you see in the shot the cylinder and cylinder head off that spare engine I had talked about in my previous video. And what I'm going to be doing here is preparing these for, or at least the cylinder anyway, for paint. So let's talk about the cylinder first. As I indicated before, this is an original bore cylinder, which is what I wanted. And I'm going to be taking it up to the machine shop tomorrow to have them bore it first over for the piston and fit the piston to the bore. Then they'll hone it and they'll clean it. Before I do that, though, what I want to do is prepare the cylinder for paint, because they're going to have to be manhandling this around in their equipment, and I don't want to have to clean it after, media blast it rather, after they've done their machining. So I'm going to do the media blasting first, primarily focused on the cylinders, or the fins on the cylinders, to clean those up so that I can paint it after I get it back from the machine shop. Now I'm going to paint this myself. And we're going into the fall or autumn season here, and I'm going to have to paint this outside, so I want to get this done while the weather is still on my side. So we're going to media blast this with glass beads. At least I'm going to start with glass beads and see how it cleans up. Then I will wash it in my parts cleaning tank thoroughly, let it dry, and then, like I said, tomorrow it'll go up to the machine shop and be machined first over for the new piston. Then I'll get it back in 2 or 3 days or so. Then I will clean it once again thoroughly, mask everything off, and then paint the cylinders and allow it plenty of time to dry before it gets reinstalled, which will be much, much later on in the project. Now, to media blast this, what I have to do is prepare it. And I don't want to blast these gasket surfaces if I can help it. I'll probably have them skim it here, or else I'll do that myself on my surface plate, either or. But I don't want media getting into the cylinder or in the transfer ports, so what I'm going to do is mask this all off, plug it. It's very difficult to keep media under pressure when you're media blasting from getting into crevices. I'm going to do my very best to prevent that. Again, it'll be masked here. I will mask around these threads, probably, though in fact I could probably media blast those as well with glass beads. I don't want to erode the threads here too much on the exhaust collar. I want to keep the media out of the transfer ports. I'm going to plug it on the inside of the cylinder here because I want to media blast the inside of the exhaust port. I did scrape that clean, but I would like to get that media blasted, but I want to prevent the media from getting inside of the cylinder, so I've got to do a thorough masking job on that, and we'll come back to that after I've got that done. In terms of the cylinder head, and you'll note that someone put a Champion spark plug in this head. I've never used a Champion spark plug in a Japanese motorcycle in my life. I've used Nippon Denso NDs, and of course the perennial favorite NGKs, but I've never used, honestly can say I've never put a Champion spark plug in a Japanese motorcycle, but nonetheless, there it is. The cylinder head was not painted. It was polished or bare alloy or aluminum of some kind. And what I'm going to do with this, I think I'm going to have it vapor blasted. Now, normally what I would do with the cylinder head or a part such as this is I would blast it with sodium bicarbonate. You've seen me do that before. And then I would come back and hand polish it to try to get it back to the original look. I thought I would try a vapor honing or vapor blasting process, not to be confused with sodium bicarbonate. It's a totally different process. It uses a water slurry to polish these or clean these surfaces up. I don't have the capability in my shop. It requires specialized equipment, though I have thought about making my own. But There is a shop about 30 miles or so away from me that does vapor blasting or vapor honing. Both terms I've heard used, vapor blasting, vapor honing. So I think what I'm going to do is take this cylinder head as well as the carburetor body. I do not have it off the project yet. And run those parts up to that vapor honing shop. That'll be my first experience with that, and have them clean these up. And I'm most curious what they're going to look like when they get back. They say it's probably the best way to prepare alloy or aluminum such as this back to its original look or appearance. So we're going to give that a shot in this project. Again, I've never done it before, so it'll be a bit of a learning for all of us. So you'll see this a bit later, quite a bit later probably, after I get this and the carburetor body vapor blasted. I've got to clean the carburetor up, get it off the bike, and it'll be a little bit before I get to that. But that's my plan with the cylinder head. And again, remember this replacement cylinder head has good threads and a spark plug hole. The one on the bike had a poor quality helicoil, or poor installation rather, of a helicoil. And so that's why I'm going to replace the head. Back to the cylinder, I'm going to go ahead and set up, well, first I'm going to mask this all off, and then I'll set up over at the media cabinet, and we'll get about half an hour or so later. And as you can see, I've got the cylinder all masked up. Got a couple layers of masking tape here, and then I trimmed around the edges with a sharp X-Acto knife. There's 2 layers there. There's multiple layers on the bottom, as you can see. Again, I did the same thing. I trimmed with a X-Acto knife. On the exhaust port, I don't know if you can see down in there or not. Let me see if I can get a light for you, if you can see that or not. There is duct tape. I took a piece of that black duct tape, the high quality duct tape that I like to use, and I lined the inside, all the ports all the way around, the transfer ports as well as the exhaust port, to prevent as much egress of the media into the cylinder as possible. But I did want to clean the inside here of what's left of the carbon after I scraped it. Now it's very difficult to prevent penetration or egress or ingress of blast media in something like this. It's almost impossible to prevent it 100%. But what I certainly want to do is slow it down and keep that to an absolute minimum when I go to the blast cabinet. That's why I use multiple layers also, so there's no penetration. So normally media will just bounce off of like a masking tape. I generally don't have a problem with that. It might abrade around the edges, but it generally won't penetrate unless you have your pressure very, very high. So I got that about ready to go, so let's go over to set up at the blast cabinet, and we'll get to see if we can't get this blasted. Again, I'm going to start with glass beads. I hope that's enough. If I'm not happy with the finish, I can switch out to something more aggressive, but I'm going to try to avoid that. You might also notice I did decide to leave the threads here bare. I'm going to go ahead and blast those, see how those come out. I've been blasting for about 5 minutes or so, and you can see I've got, you have to forgive me for the light here, but you can see I've got this cleaned up, and I got that port, exhaust port, cleaned up. But I think what I'm going to do, because this is not cleaning up as well as I would like, I think I'm going to go ahead now and plug this exhaust port and then switch over my media cabinet to something a little bit more aggressive, which will do a better job of cleaning and a whole lot quicker. I could continue on this way, but it would probably take me, might even take me a couple hours to get this clean. So plus it's going to beat up my media really bad. It's going to turn into a powder. So I think I'm going to switch over to something a little bit more aggressive, and then we'll see if we can't get this cleaned up a little quicker and a little better. Well, there's the cylinder right out of the blast cabinet. You can see I haven't even peeled anything off yet. I must say, Suzuki could have done a little better on their casting process. This is very rough. one of the roughest castings I think I've ever seen. And it was a bear to clean up. I probably have at least 45 minutes with the more aggressive black diamond media, which is a crushed coal slag. It's quite aggressive. And even with that, it didn't clean up easy. I had to work at it. But it's about as clean as I think I'm going to get it, frankly. So allow me to blow this off. I'll peel all the tape off and we'll come back and take a quick look. We've got all the masking tape off and I've got it basically cleaned up. It's about ready to go on its way to the machine shop. It took me all of 45 minutes, if not an hour, using a black diamond media, which is a fairly aggressive media. It's a crushed coal slag. I think I've talked about that in the past. I did touch this up right here, these threads for the exhaust collar. I did touch those up on my wire wheel and this face here. I think maybe you can see in there the exhaust port cleaned up really well. Inside there's no carbon anymore in there. But again, this was a rough casting. Suzuki did not put a lot of time or money into the tooling for this this piece. It's as rough as I have ever seen, probably one of the roughest. You can see 49cc right there, and on the opposite side it says Suzuki. But it did clean up eventually, and that's about as good as I'm going to be able to get it, I think, with my equipment. This surface, again, this is the cylinder head side. I might have them skim it, or I might just put it on my surface plate like I've done before and, you know, clean it up like that. Probably not going to do much here on the bottom. That's where it makes to the engine cases. But for all practical purposes, I got the cylinder ready to go to the machine shop and fit the piston to it. When I get it back, then we'll go ahead and paint it. Well, I can still paint outside while the weather's still conducive to painting outside, and then I'll just let it sit for, it'll be a while. Let's go on over to the bike now itself, the project bike. I would like to talk about a discovery I had related to the oiling. If you might recall from the introduction videos, I talked about the bike was, I thought, maybe over-oiling because it was smoking a lot. And I put a little time into researching that, and I'd like to talk about that over at the bike. The left side, you can see I have the cover off the oil injection pump, which is right there. And you can see where the cable comes down to the pump itself along with the oil feed line. You may recall from one of the previous introduction videos, I'd indicated I thought the bike was over-oiling, or at least it was smoking what I thought was excessively. Now, the previous owner indicated that he used a 100% synthetic oil, happens to use AMSOIL, the same brand that I used. And in my experience, AMSOIL is not an oil that smokes much. So my initial thinking was that the oil pump was perhaps adjusted incorrectly. Now, I did ride the bike quite a bit to get it good and warm, exercise it to make sure there's no oil that was in the lower end, and it was still smoking. So thinking that the oil pump right here was adjusted incorrectly, that is a cable coming down from the throttle, I pulled the cover off. And let me zoom in here a little closer for you so you can get a better look. Right here is the arm for the oil pump, and you can see as you twist on the throttle, that cable pulls that arm up. You may not be able to see it from your perspective, but there's a mark right where my finger is pointing on the arm, and then there's a corresponding mark on the body here of the pump. And those two marks are supposed to align like this when the pump is properly adjusted. And my thinking was that they had it adjusted too tight. In other words, they had pulled this, I'm going to simulate here, they pulled this arm up like this with the cable adjuster. Well, when I got in there, what I discovered is actually just the opposite. They had backed way off on the adjustment. In other words, feeding less oil to the engine than the marks would suggest. My speculation is probably the previous owner realized the engine was over-oiling, and in an attempt to counteract that, loosened the adjuster, allowing this arm to drop, In other words, backing off on the oil feed intentionally. It wasn't just off a little bit, it was off a lot. So that led me to believe that someone before me knew that that engine seemed to be over-oiling. That made me a little suspicious. I was thinking, well, why would they do that? So I've got a condition where running 100% synthetic, they backed way off on the oil pump adjustment. That led me to believe that maybe we have another problem, a little more serious problem. And that being, I suspect the engine was drawing transmission oil in through one of the engine seals. Now, typically when you've got bad seals in the lower end of a two-stroke engine, the engine often is hard to start cold. Well, this engine isn't hard to start. It starts stone cold. It can be setting for 3 or 4 days, even a week, and it'll start in 2, maybe 3 kicks every time. So the symptom of hard starting cold was inconsistent with leaking lower end crank seals. So what I did is I drained the transmission oil out because I wanted to measure the volume. And this engine calls for 700 cc's of transmission oil. And the previous owner indicated he had changed the transmission oil. And he was a Suzuki guy, so I'm thinking he knows what he's doing, reasonably so. When I drained the transmission oil, and it did look clean, by the way, it looked very pristine, it did not look dirty at all. It had 625 cc's of oil. Now remember, it's supposed to have 700, so that means we're down by 75 cc's. I thought, curious. So I let it drain completely overnight, refilled it with carefully measured 700 cc's of oil. I took his original 625, added 75 to it, and I was very deliberate to make sure it had 700 cc's of oil in that transmission, and then I rode the bike. I took it outside and I rode around for 3, maybe even 4 miles. I spent quite a bit of time riding around my yard in the neighborhood. I wanted to see if the oil level dropped. And after riding it for those 3 or 4 miles, I brought it back in here, drained the oil completely again. I let it drain overnight, measured it, and it was at 650 cc's, down 50. So I lost about 50 cc's of oil riding it around for 3 or 4 miles. So my speculation, or my diagnosis rather, is that the lower end, the crankshaft seals, at least one of them is leaking, and it's pulling transmission oil in to the combustion chamber, and that is leading to the over-oiling condition of the engine. If the lower seals or seal is leaking, it's probably on the right side, the side where the rotary valve is mounted. I was originally hoping to avoid splitting the engine because the transmission works fine. I'm not sure about the lower end crank bearings yet. But what this does mean is I'm going to, when I pull the engine, I'm going to certainly have to strip it down at least to get the rotary valve off of it. Because again, I think it's leaking on the right side, would be my bet. I'll have to determine at that point whether I can replace the crank seal without splitting the engine. Sometimes you can. Or whether I'm just going to go ahead and open the engine up and get inside and clean it out and take a look around. And at that point, then I'd probably end up doing the crank bearings as well as seals on both sides. So that's my diagnosis of why we're burning oil. It wasn't what I wanted to find out or discover, but again, as I've alluded to before, you always run into unexpected situations on these bikes when you're doing this kind of work. In spite of what they might look like, or sometimes how they run like this one, it runs great. Again, that's a relative term. It's got a little, the clutch is a little weak in it. It needs some clutch work, but I can do that without splitting the engine. But now I'm probably 50-50 chance I'm going to have to split this motor. Not a major deal, of course. I've split dozens of small engines like this, but it was something I was thinking maybe I could avoid in this project, but then again, perhaps I'll go ahead and do it. We'll see when we get the engine up on the bench later on. That's going to be it for this video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.